Okay, next stop on our journey through the ancient Kushite Empire, we now venture into ancient India. Firstly, we must say that the Singh people, who are commonly called Hindu people, were commercial people and merchants from India who freely traveled through the Nile, Ethiopia, the mountains of the moon. So they were familiar with this region. They were familiar with its people. They were familiar with the things that entailed that were inside this region. They were familiar with the philosophy of the people, etc. Okay, and they did regular trade in this region. Okay, now just the first thing I want to point out. So just to let you know that these two groups of people freely intermingled. Okay, that's the first point. Modern Ethiopians speak a language called Ge'ez, in which Naga means king. In fact, there's a book called the Kaba Nagast. Kaba Nagast is a book that means glory to the king. All right, the Kaba Nagast the Kaba Nagast, it talks about the transition of more modern Ethiopia, um, the state of Ethiopia, into the Christian religion. Okay, in Hindu so-called mythology, and we say so-called mythology because a lot of times mythology is not mythology. The Nagas, which again phonetically Naga is nigger phonetically, um, the Nagas ruled the Golden Age, and the language Sanskrit is written in a script called Devanagari, or just Nagari. And then we had that word Naga again. And the Nagas were said to have given them this script that they currently to this day write in, Devanagari. Okay? The Naga serpents were linked to the Ethiopian, and the Naga is how they arrive at the dragon in the Chinese culture. Okay, so we explore your Taoist culture, which they utilize the dragon heavily. They talk about the Yellow Emperor and you the Great and all these people like that in their culture. Um, as far as Buddhism, they deal heavily with the Naga serpents by name. One of the individuals who comes after Buddha, who continues Buddha's work, is a man by the name of Nag Arjuna. So the Naga serpent is very prevalent in the Buddhist culture as well as the Hindu culture. So when you're watching cartoons like Dragon Ball Z, and if anybody hasn't seen Dragon Ball Z, check out Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, and just peep out uh, the jewels that they drop in that. I mean, from the group of people who are the Namics. You know, you got a Namek called Kami, who's the guardian of the earth. You know what I mean? It's a lot of jewels in that. I don't have time to go over it, but it's a lot of jewels in Dragon Ball Z. Whenever you watching your kung fu flicks, and, you know, I like the Shaw Brothers kung fu flicks from back in the day. You know, kung fu theater. But when you're watching your more current kung fu movies and stuff, your Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragons, your Enter the Dragons, your Twin Dragons, um, the dragon comes from those Naga serpents, as those Naga serpents are emblematic of Negroes. So they're talking about you when they talk about the dragon, Enter the Dragon, and Fist of the Dragon, and all this stuff like this. Um, does anybody remember the old school G.I. Joe cartoon movie? All right, from back in the 80s, I think 86, 87, something like that, where you have Serpentor, the character Serpentor, who, if you look at him, he looks just like a pharaoh. All right, he has a cobra's hood over his head, and the word Naga means cobra. And his organization is Cobra, and they screaming out Cobra throughout the whole thing. Um, he was genetically engineered, according to the storyline. Wink, wink. You know, um, and it gets much deeper if you delve into it. You know, the GI Joe and Cobra, they fighting over the broadcast energy transmitter, the BET. You feel me? And that's a whole nother lecture about, you know, the subliminal seduction in some of these movies and things like that, like I was telling you. But it gets deeper. And if anybody gets a chance to check out or has already seen The Forbidden Kingdom, the movie with Jackie Chan and Jet Li, that goes into your Taoist culture. But your Taoist culture has a lot of elements of our culture in it as well, because a lot of the elements were taken to that culture. But that's neither here nor there. And just one more cartoon that I like to point out. Um, He-Man. If anybody remember the cartoon He-Man from back in the day, you got Skeletor. He's a darker character. You know how the dark characters supposed to be the evil characters and everything, because that's the subliminal seduction and everything like that. But you got Skeletor, who lives on Snake Mountain. Again, the Nagas are serpents and snakes. All right, and to compare the Nagas, and if anybody's familiar with the Dogon tribe of Mali, they dealt with a group of deities called the Namos, and the Namos were reptilian serpent-like deities as well. So this is nothing exclusive to the Hindu culture or anything like that, but just to touch on it a little bit, that the Naga phonetically is phonetically nigger, and it is emblematic or aligned with black people or the Ethiopians. Now let's fast forward. Let's see what Drusilla Dungeon Houston has to say about this. We're going to go into Wonderful Ethiopians real quick. Their funeral remains all over India reveal stone circles and upright massive menhors of North Africa. Okay, so once again we had the stone circles. Okay, stone circles just like we were talking about in Naphtali. All right, stone circles, and we know what they were utilized for. They were utilized for astrological purposes, them charting the stars. And don't think that they were just, they just archaeologists would have you to believe they just charting the stars to see when they're gonna plant crops and everything. No, they were charting the stars. They had a culture. They didn't have what we refer to as a religion. They had a culture. So in a religion, you can go to church and then drink a beer and then go over here and then beat on your wife or something like that. But in a culture, everything is all encompassing. You can't separate anything from your day-to-day goings and comings. If you take a shower, it ties some sort of way into your culture or the way you do things. So these stone circles were more than just for charting the stars, as they say. Okay. She goes on to say, so intermixed are all the classes of the Hindu today that all Brahmins and Sudras have identically the same formation of skull, the old formation of Ethiopia. So these people were well intermixed. All right. Now with India, we're going to deal with a class of priests. All right. And when I say a class of priests, the Brahmin priests, they're at the top of your caste system. If anybody's familiar with that, anybody look that up. They're descended from Indo-European stock, who are called your Aryans, who overtook the original people called the Dravidian people. The Dravidians are the original inhabitants of the Indus River Valley. All right. They don't speak Sanskrit, but they speak a language called Tamil. Tamil, Tamil, if anybody wants to look it up, it's related to your West African languages. And just like I said earlier in the Black Pages, because languages have families. And like I said before, you can trace a people through their language. Once again, just like how we speak English, the American dialect of English, you can go through Middle English, Old English, we can go back to German. German means offshoot. We can go from German, the different variations of German, go back to Latin. We can go back from Latin to Greek. It might be many, many dialects in between those distinctions that I just gave, but you see the progression. You can trace a people through their language, just like we have English from Anglese, Anglo-Saxon. You feel me? So we can trace a people through their language. Okay. But anyway, the Dravidians worship a different group of deities altogether. And now the title Hindu is an overgeneralization, and the word Hinduism is another overgeneralization as perceived in modern times in a group of conflicting religions that they can't be accurately grouped up under the same generalization, because they're all lumped together. You might have 2 or 3 different people that are overstood to be Hindus, but at the same time, if you explore each of their individual religions, they either totally conflict or they totally different. Okay. The people call themselves Singh. Singh. But the Aryans who became the foundation of the Brahmin priesthood created the caste system. So basically, they instituted a form of systematic racism, where the Brahmin priests or the lighter skinned people were on top and the darker skinned founders of civilization were what's known as the untouchables. Y'all get a chance to look up the plight of the untouchables in India. Y'all get to see that. Houston points out, and I quote, the ancient books read without prejudice reveal a deadly contest between the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas, the original royal stock. The literature reveals that the hostility didn't come to an end until the Brahmins gave up the hope of holding the sovereignty and took over the custody of the ancient books and priesthood. So they stopped physically fighting and they started fighting with the ancient records. They took control and custody of the ancient records so they could tailor make history. Just as we see the same pattern as we explore this whole scenario throughout history, we see the same pattern. These people taking control of these ancient records and basically writing themselves into history. Once again, deception through manipulation of history, and mind control through religion. Houston points out in ancient books of India, there's no mention of a caste system. So originally, they didn't have a caste system. There was no there was no blatant system of racism like that. Okay, Baldwin in his book Prehistoric Nations says Indo-Aryans were but a small proportion of the whole population of India. All over the country are masses whose dialects revealed that they didn't belong to the Indo-European group. So basically, this caste system, this whole Brahmin priesthood thing, and taking control of the ancient records and everything, that hard-fought battle, that was a means to control the people, this massive, massive number of people. Okay, Baldwin goes on to say that they, the Dravidians, were part of that advancing wave of the old race that swept eastward and westward, peopling primitive Arabia, Egypt, and Chaldea. The rich merchants of the ancient Indian commerce had been Dravidians. Okay, and he mentions the old race once again, and in volume in earlier volumes we spoke about this, the old race, the Anu people, the old race, the dark skinned old race from Upper Egypt, the south. The Takshak and the Naga nations who figure so largely in Sanskrit traditions were words purely African. Again, Naga, the word Naga phonetically is nigger. Okay, and they had Naga nations. It was Naga nations with tribes of Nagas, Naga tribes and everything like that. So it wasn't just some characters in mythology. They were tribes and tribes of people who were understood to be blood related to these Naga serpents, and you had deities who were classified as Nagas. If anybody's familiar with any Hindu mythology, if anybody's familiar with the deity Varuna was understood to be the king of heaven and earth, and he was understood to be a Naga. Okay, moving right along. We just talked about the Naga serpents. All right, Houston tells us the Rajas of Kush, Bihar, claim a divine descent. The name Rajput means royal descent. It was a title of the old conquering class of the ancient Kushites. Okay, Houston states the early history of the Dravidian is yet to be deciphered, because once again, like I said earlier, they have you run into temples and ancient buildings that are so old that the language on these ancient buildings, because languages evolve, like we were just talking about, German to Old English, to the English we speak now. Nobody knows how to speak. We don't know how to speak Old English. If a person spoke the dialect of Old English to you today, you wouldn't understand what they were saying. It's variations in the language. Languages change. So you run into these old castles, not castles, but these old palaces and these old temples with these inscriptions on the wall, and nobody can decipher them because the language is from a time so old that the language cannot be deciphered and the language is not used anymore. Okay, she also states the Dravidians in ethnic types are Ethiopian and the race of India from which her civilization originated. So these are the originators of the civilization of the Indus River Valley. All right. Wonderful Ethiopians tells us in ancient times, India was ruled by Rajas who were assisted by a council of elders. Sometimes the Raja was influenced by a queen mother or Dowager. In Kushite races, lineage was traced through the mother. The succession of the Raja was traced in the same way. This was changed upon the ascendancy of the Brahmins. Okay, let's just touch on that for a minute. Okay, and like the author states, in the Kushite tradition, the ascendancy went through the mother. Case in point, in Egypt, the deity Aset, who most people call Isis, has a throne on her head. And her name, Aset, of which Isis is a derivative, literally means throne, okay? Signifying that the woman as the means of ascendancy to the throne. Because as York points out on so many occasions that they were aware of the woman's mitochondrial DNA, and the mitochondrial DNA is something that's passed from mother to daughter. Sons don't get their mother's mitochondrial DNA. Son, you have mitochondria in your cells, but you don't get the same mitochondrial DNA that's passed from mother to daughter that women inherit from their mothers. And realistically, black people are the gods of the planet, but the black woman specifically is the god of the physical realm, period. Because the black women, period, are the perfected version. Men are a genetic defect of woman. And Dr. York, he addresses this on so many occasions. He addresses this in the Holy Tablets, in the Sacred Records of Atum Re. He addresses this in the actual fact series called Who is God, Male or Female. He addresses this in the actual fact series called Genetic Kids. He addresses that in many different places, and he explains how the Y chromosome is a maimed version of the X chromosome. The X chromosome has more genetic material than the Y chromosome, and it's women, use every part of their bodies. Men have things like nipples on their bodies, but we don't have any use for them. So it's very obvious if you actually know what you're looking at. But that's neither here nor there. And we're going to address the sisters in a later volume of the Black Pages. We got to have something for the sisters, lift the sisters so they know who they are. But the Kushites, it was a part of our culture to honor women. Okay? So Houston states, and she quotes another author, but she states, and I quote, Wilford, who had an extended and thorough knowledge of Hindu mythology, points out that Sanskrit writings describe the extended domain of the ancient Kushite Empire. In these books are the relations about early Egyptian history. It mentioned one of the immigrations going out from the Upper Nile having peopled India. The Purunas divided the world into 7 dweepas or divisions. Sanchu Dweepa was Africa in general. Kusha Dweepa was the land of Kush, India, and the Mediterranean. And I think we spoke about the Dweepas a little bit earlier, about the divisions and everything like that. In ancient times, Eastern Ethiopia was considered India, and Western Ethiopia was considered Africa. And if you do your research, you'll find out that the Ethiopians ruled India for thousands upon thousands of years. All right. Now we're about to go a little bit into the overthrow of their society by the Aryan invaders. And if anybody who's not familiar with the story, and a lot of your so-called archaeologists or people or whatever, they consider this whole thing about the Aryans invasion, the Aryan invasion of India as a theory or a myth. It's not a theory. I mean, basically, if you do your research, it all lines up. Basically, you have a group of people, your Aryans of Indo-European stock, coming down from the Eurasian steppes, coming into a well-established civilization. And like we said before, the people of southern India, the Dravidian people, they established this civilization or whatever. They were heavily influenced by the Kushite Empire. Those individuals those black men from Upper Egypt, all right, or what's called Nubia, that migrated over there. They were doing commerce with them and everything like that. They had their own setup. They had their own language. They had their own culture, their own religious books and everything like that. These Aryans came down, saw their civilization, liked it, infiltrated and merged in and mixed in with them for a period of time, and then overthrew them. Just like how we talk about in so many other stories in this same lecture series about how that's done in that's repeated in many different civilizations. It's not just in the Indian civilization. It's done in multiple different civilizations by these same stock of people. Okay, moving right along. Houston writes, the Brahmins only reached power and overthrew Buddhism in the year 700 AD. They took over the ancient records. She goes on to say, all the scenes of the mythology on the walls of those ancient temples are southern, which is Dravidian, and don't represent any phase of the life of Aryans. Okay? According to Asiatic Nations, the Indians, Volume 3, the carvings may be seen armies on elephants, never horses, and it just make note the Aryans rode horses. Okay, you had your Africans, your ancient Africans were one of the first people to actually ride elephants into battle. Okay, Aryans rode horses, not elephants. He goes on to say, if these structures were reared 900 years ago, the Ethiopians alone could have furnished the architects. For at the late date, the world had lost the art of carving granite. He's talking about some of the temples in India that the only people on the planet at that specific time that had the knowledge of how to carve granite, the stone granite, were actually your Ethiopians. Okay, and we go on. Now these Brahmin priests were at odds with the religion of Buddhism. Okay, and because it was Buddhism itself is older than what they give it credit for. It's an ancient religion. The older temples of India are dedicated to Buddha. Okay, Buddhism is spoken of in the Hindu text called the Ramayana. The Ramayana is another Sanskrit text. Okay, it's older than Siddhartha Gautama. Okay, Siddhartha Gautama is the historical founder of what they call Buddhism. That's the guy. He was a prince, he was royalty and everything like that, and he decided to give up his whole situation, being rich and being a dignitary, to basically find the path to enlightenment. So that's the historic person, but it's older than him because he is understood to be but one incarnation of the Buddha. In many places, he is recognized as the seventh incarnation of Buddha. Okay, the Jains, and Jainism is a whole other offshoot of Buddhism. It's a religion as well. The Jains, for example, in their religion acknowledge a precursor of Siddhartha. Okay, wonderful Ethiopian says, and I quote, it, which it meaning Buddhism, sprang from some earlier form of Kushite faith. Okay, and according to Ancient Races of Western Europe, chapter 20, it says the Kushites of Western Europe possess the worship of Buddha. Okay, all right, and as Kushites, we did have the understanding that our deities or our ancestors would incarnate in the flesh from time to time and walk amongst us. Okay, that ties into your whole anthropomorphic concept of God versus your humanized concept of God. Humanized concept of God is more so the monotheistic religion. The anthropomorphic concept of God is more so what your ancients dealt with. That a being would be grown from amongst them, from the genes or from certain bloodlines. A being would be grown amongst them from the universe to walk and talk amongst them and help them solve their problems and help them, with their life situation or whatever. The living universe would grow somebody to help them out. Okay. So in our Kushite culture, we had the concept of avatars, or as Islam would call them, describe them, Ila Mutajessis, or gods incarnate. This was one reason we charted the stars, to chart their births. So this whole concept of, the wise men and all this stuff like that, it's not exclusive to your Christianity concept or whatever. It was taken from ancient religions and ancient people. But as far as the Brahmin priests, they were not the creators of the writings, though today they are the custodians, interpreters, and priests. They only attained this place after a bloody struggle with the native races. Okay, this is what Houston has to say. As time went on, Brahmins added to, corrupted the Vedas to conform their excessive pretensions. Okay, Brahmanism is full of elements foreign to the Aryans. It worships gods that they didn't bring into India, and traditions borrowed from darker races. Okay, wherever Brahmins found a god whom it was politics to reverence, they made him one of their own. Later, Brahmins tried to consolidate and absorb everything. So basically, like I was saying, that's how we arrive at Hinduism as a That's one of the ways we arrive at Hinduism as a group of conflicting religions, because in a lot of cases, a lot of deities that they lump as Hindu deities, if you actually do the research, they might be a Dravidian deity. They might be a deity that wasn't even a part of that whole construct. They might be a deity that's not even mentioned in the Vedas. So as they conquered different places and they came upon different things or whatever, they incorporated the deity to pacify the people, or just to trick the people all together, and to get them to follow them. So again, we run into a situation where people alter records just to conveniently place themselves in history in a position of power. Okay, so as you can see, we have run across this instance one more time. Taylor making history as a certain group of people see fit. Let's see here. Let me see here. Okay, the priest class will add any element to their religion that they saw fit, but in reality there's a difference between Vedic and Dravidian gods and culture altogether. And as far as the Aryans, they didn't bring any women. Okay, look, we'll address this. They didn't bring any women, and they took Dravidian wives. They took Dravidian women. Okay, and that is similar to the founding of Rome. When they basically, it was a homosexual society, and they took women from other civilizations in order to perpetuate their civilization, to refuel their civilization, because it was a homosexual society. And it ties into the whole concept of albinos and lepers and things of that nature, who didn't have enough salts in their bodies to reproduce, so they had to go and rape and kidnap Cushite women. Okay, Houston states that the Jains, wealthy southern Dravidians, an offshoot from Buddhism, accused the Brahmins of destroying the real historical books of India wherever they gained ascendancy. They assert that the Puranas were formerly a historical book. All right. And Houston also points out that that Iranian legends said that the whole region of ancient Persia to India was inhabited by a race of black men with short woolly hair. So that's just kind of touching on that, just letting it be known that we inhabited that portion of the globe as well. All right.